All right, so good morning, everyone. I am Lauren Cook, your Dean of College and Gap Year Advising. You have joined Coffee with Miss Cook, or whatever beverage you're choosing to consume this morning. This is our second of these, and at the end, I have a little slideshow. I will just remind you of dates for one more in March, and then we'll have a final one in May when we come back from Pesach break. So a couple of housekeeping reminders up top, as always. You're on mute right now. If you can stay on mute as I do a little bit of content up top, that would be great. And then we'll just open up the floor for the balance of the time for questions, whether that's live or if you want to put things in the chat. I am recording this, so if you need to pop out, no problem. And I will get it out to you by the end of the week, whenever Mr. McDonald is able to get it on YouTube. He's our technical magician. And this is an hour-long program. That's what it's designed to be. So we'll stop at 9, whether we're sort of through all the questions or not. You can always email me. We can pick it up next month, whatever works. But I do want to honor the time that we've got here. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. The content that I wanted to just start with this morning, because I do think it's a good, there we go, hopefully you can see that. I do think it's a good time to do a little gentle introduction to thinking about gap years for your students, which I know may be quite a while from now. But about a year ago this time, I was in Israel on a MASA Israel Journey funded program. And when I came back, I thought, this is a good moment to just make sure everyone's had a little bit of an introduction to the idea of a gap year, whether your student decides to do that or not, whether you're interested in it or not, just to understand what the options are out there. So this is something I put together last year, and know that there's more information generally about gap years in the College Advising Handbook, which I will remind you is on the JCHS website on the College Advising page. You just scroll down a tick and there's a number of resources there, and one of them is the handbook. And so there's 2 pages in there with some links and information about popular gap year programs as sort of a starter place, but I can also send these slides out afterwards as well. So I want to just start by making sure we're all using the same kind of definition of a gap year. There is this natural break, right, between graduation from high school and actually starting your college career. And I think it can be a great moment for some students to really explore interests, think about their identity before they start that next part of their educational journey, which I think we're all aware is quite expensive. And we want to make sure that the student is getting the most out of it possible. And so sometimes having this little breather and moment to do something outside of the traditional academic realm, I think can be really useful developmentally. And I will say that anywhere between 20 to 30% of each JCHS graduating class is choosing to do a gap year. So I think we had just about 10 or 11 students in the class of 2023 that chose to do this. I believe now all of them are actually on their gap programs. There was a little bit of disruption, obviously, with life in Israel post October 7th. And most of our students do choose to go to Israel, but we'd always have at least 1 or 2 that may be doing something outside of that pattern as well. And then why would you think about doing this? I know some folks are like, this is extra money. This is, I don't want my student taking a year off. They won't ever return to college. Well, I will say there's a lot of benefits to it. And I saw this as an admission officer when I worked at a liberal arts college before coming to JCHS. The students we received coming off of a gap year were different in really great ways. And so why might you do this? Well, yes, it's a little time to recharge. The K through 12 situation in the US, I think, can feel a little bit like a hamster wheel sometimes. And so to step off of that for a moment and think about what are the interests, values, goals for a student outside of the menu of things they've been given, especially in high school. So just kind of to find their purpose and energy and all of that again. It is a moment where there can be some personal growth, self-discovery. Again, there's a menu for high school, academically, extracurricularly. It's limited by the nature of things. And so stepping out into, the real world, you see a larger menu of choices, right? You can do some career exploration. Some folks do some shadowing or interning during this time before they go to college and kind of commit to that major or a particular pathway. It can give them a bit more sense of direction and purpose, and whether that's career or whether that's just thinking about their own values and morals and ethics and what's going to kind of steer them as they go into adulthood. Of course, increased maturity and independence. I mean, you're literally just growing your brainstem and your frontal lobe for another year and becoming a bit more of a fully formed human during that time. And if they choose to do an actual GAP program, they're often structured so that you're getting to taste some independence, maybe living in an apartment or navigating a city on your own with still some supports and scaffolding around you, right? So it's a little bit of like a stepped situation before they're turned loose on a college campus. There might be some connection to heritage, identity. I think that's a big reason why many of our students choose to go to Israel, but we have students that do language immersion programs in Central and South American countries, if that were, they might have family history or, choose to do things that will connect them to some piece of their past and perhaps strengthen some of their connection to that. And then all of this really research shows leads to some increased chance for success in college because of all of these various pieces, whether, a program is leaning in on one or another. So I think it's something really serious to consider. Again, the majority of our kids do not choose to do this, but I do think for the subset that do, it can be incredibly, incredibly valuable. Let me make sure. There we go. Okay, so what do people do at this time? It's not a year off. First of all, I want to sort of, correct that misconception. It is a time where things can be very productive and transformative. Service is an opportunity. Some folk, whether they're doing that here in the US or abroad, that's a very popular option. Again, doing something that might be career focused, whether it's shadowing, actual work, or an internship. Language immersion, trying to beef up some skills for potential future career or own personal edification. Travel, getting to see the world, do some things. And there are some programs that might combine your own family background heritage with a travel component. Academics, of course, you can choose to do college level coursework. This might be language immersion. This might be, I made a note about including learning support. Some students can choose to use this time, and there are programs to help you with things like executive functioning and learning to live independently. So if you've got a student with a complex learning profile, this could be a real opportunity to give them another bit of time to just continue scaffolding up their skills to position them well for success in college. Jewish learning, of course, can be very important to many of our students. We have folks that choose to go to seminary, to yeshiva, to really spend some time in that realm deeply and intensely. And it doesn't have to be a program. There are lots of programs that have a tuition fee and a certain set amount of time, and they might be affiliated with a youth group or with a college, but some of our students choose to sew together some different experiences. We had a student once who did some language immersion for 2 months and then went and did search and rescue programming in another country, and then came home and shadowed someone here career-wise. So you could put together, or the student could put together their own set of opportunities that they're interested in. In terms of deferring from college, though, which is often a piece of this process, the college does want to know that you have a plan, right? So you can't just say, can I take a year off? I'm going to figure out what I'm going to do later, right? Which is why we want to talk about this now and have folks thinking about what at least a loose structure for that year might look like. Sorry, letting in one more person. All right. And so then I want to just say a few words about Massa, as I did see, 15 of their different programs, as well as a number of the universities in Israel that have affiliations with some of their programs. They generally, first of all, don't oversee a lot of the yeshivas or seminaries in Israel. There are a couple that are part of the suite of Massa programs, but they mostly traffic in things that are a bit more experiential, sometimes secular or not. it kind of depends. But they are funded by the government, and their interest is really just trying to get Jewish folks to come to Israel and have some kind of experience there and tailor it to what they might be particularly interested in. I think sometimes folks are a little, oh, and yes, Masa is the Hebrew word for journey. And they have a whole suite of programs that, there are some summer programs. They do have a robust gap situation. And then they do have some programming for adults as well. And I think that they have some hand in birthright and some other types of experiences in Israel. They did want to make sure that US families understand that 90% of the people who have done their programs come back home, right? So they're not all choosing to make Aliyah and stay. This is not, to sort of convince people to be in Israel, although some, small subset choose to. But most students go, have a really amazing experience, and then come back and pick up where they left off with their college plans and their life here. And yes, so you can go to their website. I've linked it below there to look at a number of the options. And they do offer some funding opportunities as well. Some of the ticket prices for these things can look not quite like college tuition, but not terribly far off. But there are a lot of funding sources because, of course, I think everyone's goal is just to get kids out to Israel to see what's happening there. And if there are things they can do to make that more possible for your family, then they certainly will. I will also say, for a more broad look at Israel options, there's a great organization called the American Israel Gap Year Association. And that's run by a woman named Phyllis Folb, who's based in LA. She's made a book that encompasses a lot of the Masa options, but also a number of the most popular and consistent yeshiva and seminary options. I have probably 5 or 6 copies of that book in my office. So if your child ever wants to come in and kind of borrow one from me, take it out for a few months. I do work at like a lending library, so they're welcome to do so. Phyllis also has a great website. And prior to the pandemic, and I think she might have brought it back in person last fall, had a big Israel gap year fair in LA every November. And so sometimes organizations in the Bay Area, like our local NCSY chapter, would actually fund students to be able to fly down and go to that for a night. Sometimes those GAP programs will also then fly up to the Bay Area just after, usually just to visit JCHS. So know that we do have that resource in state, although it's not, necessarily local. And of course, I'm happy to talk with you more about options. The Jewish Studies faculty at school, if you're thinking about Israel in particular, are also a great resource to think about the finer distinctions between different seminaries or yeshivas or programs that you might be thinking about. So know that you have all of these resources. Okay, so I'm going to stop there on gap years and just point out a couple of, well, LOL, stop. Okay, I will just say the USA Gap Year Fairs start tonight in the Bay Area. And when I stop sharing my screen, I'll put a link to that registration in the chat. So USA Gap Year Fairs are run by something called Go Overseas. They have a tremendous website with a really great search function, a lot of options to filter to find the exact kind of programs that you might be looking for. And so this is a much more broad international gap year fair. There's often a couple of Israel options, and there might be like a Masa booth in particular. But for folks that are looking outside of Israel, this can be great. And I know that they're doing one in Berkeley, maybe out at Athenian and Danville. There's one up in Marin and one down. I think the one tonight is in like the Palo Alto area. So again, I'll put that link in a moment. Also just note the next Coffee with Miss Cook will be about a month from now, towards the end of March. If I haven't sent the calendar invite, I will do that soon to make sure it's appearing on your calendar. I'm low key, no promises, but hoping to get a college admission officer or two to start the day with us. So maybe you could ask them some questions about things from their perspective. I'll remind you again about the case studies program. I think I mentioned this last month. I will continue to be emailing you about it. That's a Sunday. I now know it will be at USF. They're actually going to host for us this year, since some of the local high schools cannot deal with the capacity of the 10 Bay Area independent schools that are all invited to this. But again, this is where we have 100-some college representatives from some relatively competitive and certainly national, it's a national program, where you spend about an hour doing a mock admission committee in groups of parents or groups of students led by those college reps. And then the second part is a college fair where you can learn more about the individual institutions. One of the most helpful things every year I hear from both junior students and parents. So make sure that's on your calendar if you're able to make it. And I'll send out registration and whatnot probably next month. And then our last Coffee with Miss Cook will be after Pesach break in early May. And I think that Miss Beck will probably join us for that to talk a little bit more about the social emotional piece of this entire process, because I know it brings up stuff for all of us. So, all right. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing on my screen. There you all are. And let me, before I open it up for questions, just put a few links in the chat. So here is the link for MASA if you are interested. And then I'll put in the American Gap Year Association. Phyllis also serves as kind of a consultant on gap years. Again, I think you can start with folks in our JS department, with me, with some of these free resources I'm offering to you before you pay someone to help you. But know that she does have a tremendous amount of expertise if you're really wanting to get into the fine distinctions between specifically some of the yeshiva and seminary options. And then the Go Overseas link there is for those USA Gap Year fairs. I think they ask for registration in advance, but you could also just show up. But you do have to click on the dates and locations to see exactly where it is and what time over the next few days. Okay, so now we've got that gap year business out of the way. I would love to know what's on your mind, either about this or anything else related to college advising. So feel free to put something in the chat, to unmute yourself. If you want to raise your little Zoom hand, that often brings some sense of order to things. But where can we begin? Questions? Lawrence, yes, please.
Hi. We're trying to figure out the best use of time this summer to try to help leverage the the research process, and have been wavering on, do we look at colleges after they're accepted to determine which one is appropriate? I mean, obviously, I think that's the case, but what can we do strategically over the summer to help with that, narrowing down process? And if you have any advice.
Absolutely. Excellent question. I do often get the question of like, is it even worth visiting a college during the summer? And I will generally say yes. I do think some starter things you can think about over the next 6 to 8 months are to get onto some college campuses, but that can be local. And you can have places locally kind of stand in for types of schools. So getting to a UC campus so that you're seeing a large major public research institution, going to take a tour maybe at USF just to see what an urban, private, mid-sized institution feels like. You could go out to St. Mary's College of California in Moraga to see what a smaller liberal arts college, suburban kind of campus feels like. These don't have to be places that your student in particular is interested in, but if they haven't been on college campuses much or are not quite sure if they don't have preferences yet, that's a great starting place for preferences. If your student is a step ahead of that and has some sense of things, some preferences, but you don't know that you want to make a big trip to New England during the summer when colleges are not open for classes, I would say the next step would be to do some online visits with the particular schools that the student thinks they're interested in. So doing a virtual information session, a virtual tour, that's going to give them a bit more of a sense of a particular place that they're excited about. If the school pays attention to that demonstrated interest, then it's, sort of checking a box for them in terms of contact with the college. And I will say one of the biggest challenges that students find in the fall when they're actually completing applications is answering those questions on certain applications about, well, why do you want to go to Boston University? What is it about the University of Michigan curriculum and the particular major you've chosen that excites you? You know, and students come to me going, what do I do, Ms. Cook? Say, well, you need an answer. You have to do some research. And so if you haven't visited, you know, which is always delightful if you've seen it with your own eyes, you need to have done some engagement before we get to September and October. Otherwise, you know, and I watch students just kind of like scrape the website for some language and some very superficial kind of answers for those questions. And that's rarely successful, especially at some of the most selective places. So engaging, hearing from admission, hearing from some students, some particulars about certain schools, even if that's online, that's a great use of your time. And I will say, I wouldn't wait to visit everywhere until you know where you're in. I would try and do a little bit if you can, if there's a family wedding, if there's a bar mitzvah, if you're going on vacation. I mean, I'm the worst about vacation. I will go anywhere and look to see what the college is nearby. So I would say if there are ways you can utilize any, you know, organic travel that might already be happening, that can be helpful. And we're seeing like a crunch happening this year because of all sorts of shenanigans with the FAFSA and the financial aid process, which may not be completely resolved with this class. There may be more stuff that drags into your students' process next year. I think decisions are going to be delayed arriving, and only some schools so far have moved the date by which students have to respond. So I think we're going to hit a 3 or 4 week window where everybody's gotten their offers and then they have to make a decision. And if you're trying to visit 5 or 6 places in a meaningful way in that amount of time, while it's the end of senior year and AP exams and all the rest, it's a recipe for disaster. So I would try, you know, and I've seen the calendar for next year. We've got a lot of long weekends in October because of where the holidays fall. So if you're able to make use of any of that as well, I think that can be helpful. And I will just back up to my first point about visiting during the summer and say that can absolutely be useful. You're always going to have a current student that's your tour guide. Colleges really do employ students all summer, even if they don't have classes. So you will get some from the horse's mouth kind of description of things. And some places do have summer classes or have, you know, some folks on campus during the summer, so you can still get a little bit of a sense of the energy. But man, nothing beats standing in a location. I mean, I just was flown out to Syracuse 2-3 weeks ago for their counselor program, and I had an entirely different image in my mind of like physically where the Syracuse University campus was. And the pictures were accurate. I didn't know it was literally downtown, you know, and so it looks like this suburban walkable campus, which it is, but then you can walk right into downtown Syracuse, and it just changed my whole perception of it by physically being there and getting the aesthetics of it. So don't discount that as something that can be really helpful. That was such a long answer. I'm so sorry.
No, thank you very much.
Excellent.
Perfect.
Got a message about, do you know when College Board will release the next batch of SAT testing dates? If I wish I knew in advance anything College Board was doing, to be honest. I don't. I will say we used to have a very predictable calendar about when they'd release things and when registration would open. And they have, since the pandemic, tried to be much more fluid and do things a little bit earlier than normal. So I would say that normally we would hear sort of in May or June, they would open the registration for what they considered the next academic year, which usually includes August. But they've done it earlier than that, randomly a day in March last year. And so when it happens, usually my college counseling listservs go bananas with everything is open, tell your kids. So I will tell you all when I see it. But if any of you see it before me, please let me know, because College Board is not particularly communicative with high school counselors, which is maddening. I will say that you can look online and they do have a pretty set pattern for when they offer testing dates. And I do think there was something in my Jewish school listserv recently that hilariously, they are trying to avoid Yom Kippur in the fall. And so they are offering 2 Saturday options to avoid Yom Kippur. So instead it'll be on Shabbat. So if you do a little Googling for the 24-25 dates, you can see what people guess they will be, and that's usually correct. Like 99% of the time, College Board doesn't make big changes with the kind of dates from year to year. Yes, and Ted has some advice about seeing schools, so excellent.
My tough daughter, who said she wants to be in Four Seasons, got a rude awakening in the Northeast yesterday or last week. So
I love it.
And she would not wear a hat or gloves, even though I brought them for her.
Yeah, that's a thing. Californians. When I was at Syracuse, my friend I was with, who works at a school in San Mateo, just refused to put his winter coat on the whole time. I thought, what are we doing? It was 30 degrees, but okay, Nell, what is your question?
Yeah, well, one, I probably should talk to you also outside of this in terms of but it's financial aid for gap years. So I'm trying to work on that now with Bear, but also one thing that was surprising was that, for the Jewish Federation here, they changed how they do it, and now the individual doesn't apply, but you have to get the organization where you're going to apply for the aid for you. Wow. And that also happens in January. So it's like we were still, and I guess I just was kind of wondering about that timeline. Maybe you can say more about trying to fund programs that maybe aren't part of MASA, and where do we look for funding, and also what is that timeline?
Yeah, great question. And I might not have all the answers on the timeline if some of these organizations are changing things, but I will say some pretty typical places to stop for aid. Federation, obviously, is one of them. Jewish Family and Children's Services has scholarships both for college and for GAP experiences. And the organizations themselves hopefully offer something to you. And unlike the college financial aid process, oftentimes the organizations allow you to stack these funds, right? That just because you get something from Jewish Family and Children's Services doesn't mean that then that organization is going to pull their money from you. That kind of stuff can happen with college funding. And I think you could also look if you wanted to do some kind of loan, which isn't always, oh, wow, I'm getting like a little thumbs down thing. Zoom is starting. I had fireworks go off with my family yesterday when I was Zooming with them, apropos of nothing. So I think it's hard to make hand gestures and not have, oh, yes, I see that, Noah. How exciting. But I think that now I've lost my train of thought. Oh, Hebrew Free Loan is also a place that some folks can look at to fund educational pursuits, Israel pursuits. And then, also they do home loans.
Yeah, I guess I was also just wondering about, because there's college, which is like, maybe we want to use some of those resources for colleges. They're kind of a thing. Well, we don't want to kind of drain the resources for the gap year.
Right. And so I think that's also a conversation to have with some of these organizations about do they, what are their policies around spreading the money around, right? And, can you double dip between the gap year, your Israel experience funding and college funding or not? But yeah, and then I don't know, the Hillel funding as an organization may be directed mostly at college, but it probably wouldn't hurt to look at Hillel.org because I know they have like 600 some different kinds of scholarships. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's some stuff in there related to gap years. So yeah, good luck though. I know it's not inexpensive. Other questions? I'll just name the elephant in the room. I put it in the email yesterday about all the testing media that's happening. I am waiting, I guess, for the dust to settle, but I don't know if the dust will settle, if it's going to be another month or two of some of these announcements from schools. I do think we'll have more places that tell us that they are going to go back to, in some form or fashion, requiring test scores. I don't think we're done with those announcements, but I am seeing, the other side of the coin, places reaffirming or even making permanent their test optional policies. So this is going to continue to be a maze of things to navigate over the next few months. And if you are concerned, I know we've got some chunk of the junior class that is getting off of the testing train and not choosing to test, which I'm still endorsing. But I think as other announcements come out, if anybody's getting nervous about going with that route, we can certainly have an individual meeting and talk more about the colleges that your student is thinking about, what their policies are. One of the interesting things about, I believe it was Yale's policy, is that it's ACT, SAT, or AP scores. And so some students may be covered just by the AP classes and testing that they plan to take. Other places, like I think Michigan's policy has in it, like you could send a PSAT if you wanted to. I don't know anyone who wants to send their PSAT scores to colleges, but love that flexibility. But I think the big takeaway here, as lists are still being formulated and you're thinking about goals for your kids, is that I often think about the admission process for a college as kind of a free sample of what life would be like on their campus. Right. And so if an institution is going back to saying this metric is really important to us, that may not stop with the college admission part of it, right? That there may be more of those metrics that are important as a student on that campus. So if your child is not great with high stakes, highly timed, regurgitative testing, then they might want to think about whether that is something that is has value placed on it at that institution, right? And if there are other places that might serve them better. So, and this is true of the writing that places ask you to do. I think you can tell like how Jesuit a school is by how much they lean into like religious talk in their supplemental questions on the application. Like, I think you can look for cues in the things that the student is asked to do when applying to tell you what that school really values. So this should be another filter through which you're kind of running the list as to how important is testing and how important is testing, how good at testing is my student, as you're factoring that into what their final application list is going to be. What else? Other questions, sources of anxiety, conversations coming up at home. We've just done course scheduling. I hope that folks are feeling okay about the proposals at least, and then we'll see what actually ends up working with the complicated puzzle that is the schedule. Everyone should send Ms. Bregman a bouquet of flowers, because what she does to make that puzzle course schedule try and work and honor all of your kids' requests is truly magnificent and mysterious to me. But I think I've had conversations with most of your children or you about things that they were thinking about for next year. So I feel good about plans in place. What else?
Hi, Lauren. I'm curious to know how big a part GPA plays in the application process. So if we look in terms of a child's resume versus their essay versus what they have been involved with versus the GPA, kind of how does that fit in?
Yeah, great question. I will say the GPA itself as a number doesn't tell a lot because there's context behind it, right? So I think the transcript and the whole story that is told there, almost every college is going to tell you that's the most important part of the application. And so the number is a piece of that, but I think where colleges start is the class trajectory over 4 years and what your curriculum has looked like. And of course, the JCHS graduation requirements set you up for eligibility for UC, CSUs. You're getting all this sort of basic stuff there, and in some cases, a little beyond the basics. And so then colleges may be looking to see, all right, well, within the context of what Jewish Community High School of the Bay has to offer, honors classes, AP classes, the things that might be a bit more rigor. What choices has this individual student made based on their talent, skills, interests, limits? And how have they done with that? And so it's not a sort of apples to apples thing. I don't think students end up like in a cage match with each other around who has more APs or more honors or whatnot. But with that student's interest, so STEM kids are probably going to have more of the AP sciences, humanity kids might have more in that realm. The folks who've gone to really advanced level JS courses, are impressive. And we try to, especially with the Jewish studies curriculum, bring to life for college reps that are not knowledgeable about this, about the levels of rigors and things like advanced Bible and commentary and advanced Talmud and all of that. And then your grades are important. I often get the question of like, is it better to take an AP class and get a B or take an at-level class and get an A? And a college rep will say to you, well, it's best to get an AP class with an A. And, knowing that our kids are not robots, that's not always going to happen. So I think being judicious about where you choose to do rigor and not just try and rack up this list of APs, but be intentional about where are my strengths and I feel like I can challenge myself, and where am I self-aware that like maybe, chemistry is not my thing, science may not be my thing, and so I'm going to lean into something else for my sources of rigor. And so within that context, they're then looking to see how the grades have hopefully either been kind of steady over the 4 years or been on an upward trajectory. And we have a lot of kids with the upward trajectory, whether that's they have some transitional issues freshman year, whether, there's the pandemic of it all and some learning loss, whether, we've got kids that get diagnosed with different learning differences, profiles during their 4 years. Maybe they start medications or do some different kind of supports that help lift their grades. So most colleges are also looking at that context as well for what's behind the grades. Is there a story there? So that's a long answer to your question. I would say GPA is important, but that other stuff behind it is also important as well. And every time a college rep is reading an application from JCHS, they get a profile of the school right along with it. And the profile for this past year, again, is on the College Advising website. On the right-hand side of the page, there's a little box that says for college reps. So if you're curious about what reps see, it's a 2-page typically, although I think we still have a 3rd page that's got a bit of a COVID addendum about how we dealt with COVID. Since this year's senior class were freshmen then. It lists our whole curriculum. It lists where folks go to college. It gives some snippets around like we do experiential learning. We require community service, just to give like JCHS in 60 seconds so they understand what's available to our students and also what's not available to them, right? So they're not at Lowell High School where there are 30 AP options. There are 16 at JCHS. This is their menu. And there are usually some stats about the senior class and like the middle 50% of GPAs. Since we don't rank students, and I think the person who has the highest GPA in the class may not be that different from the person who has the 13th GPA in the class, it's giving a middle kind of 50% of this is where, the middle of our class sits grade-wise, just lets colleges have a sense of contextually where they might fall, if they're in the upper end, if they're in the lower end. But that's about as much as we do to kind of distinguish student to student by GPA. And if your student transferred, which I know we have a number of transfers, that is a little trickier because they'll have 2 GPAs, right? Depending on how long they were at their prior school, and then something different for JCHS. And we send both of those transcripts off to every school they apply to. We don't tend to combine those, right? We're not going to list another institution's classes on the JCHS transcript. But within a college, people recalculate GPA's curriculums all the time. Some private schools strip out religious classes because they don't think of those as the core academic disciplines. Some, like the UCs and the CSUs, take out freshman year grades. They're just looking at sophomore and junior year. And if those are across 2 different schools, they'll combine those for your, like an internal, use the GPA for sophomore and junior year. What schools are doing with their own processes is kind of behind the curtain. So we don't always have access or transparency to what they are considering your students' GPA, but we just give them the data as we have it from however many institutions, and they may combine it. So. Yeah. Other questions? We've got good questions this morning. Well, I will put a question out to all of you. If I did try and have 1 or 2 of my college admission friends come in to chat with us for a coffee, I'm curious about the kind of things you'd want to know. Would it be useful to have someone from a UC with us? Would it be useful to have someone from a small private school? I mean, obviously there are a million individual personal questions you may want to ask about your own child, which you can do on your own time. But if there are, larger pieces of information that you're interested in, please either put it in the chat or drop me an email. I've got a pretty big network and folks are really happy to engage with schools, especially at this point in the process when it's still in kind of a more big picture realm. Yeah, definitely interested in UC. Yeah. All right. I'll see what I can do. 8 a.m. is usually a fine time for someone to log in before they get into their meetings for the day. And I do find if you interface with any college reps one-on-one individually, these are human beings who do this work because they like kids. They think college is transformative. They really earnestly want to help kids find a good match and help find young scholars for their institutions, and that want this to feel less scary and secretive within the confines of whatever their particular institution's rules are. So interested in small schools, any women's schools? I love that question. I'm a women's college graduate, so although now I think we're calling them gender diverse. So just want to make sure that folks know that is definitely an option out there. So we can look into that. I do have one question in the chat, and then I'll get to you, Patty, about how important it is to have an internship this summer. I'll just answer generally about summer. And I will say that everybody should absolutely get at least a week or 2 to not have things required of them. Please knock it off with your kids for a minute. Just let them have summer for a second. And then, yes, it is important that they're doing something with that time. Whether it's an internship or not, that completely depends on if there is something meaningful that's available in an area they're actually interested in. Terrific. That can be great. That can help build a narrative with their college applications. That can give them some practical insight into something. Just as Ted's child visited a campus and thought, oh, maybe seasons are not for me. Maybe your child needs to discover that they in fact don't like to be confronted with blood if they're thinking about medicine. So it can be very useful to do that sort of thing during the summer. But being a camp counselor, bagging groceries at Safeway, doing some independent artwork, traveling to Europe with the family, taking an online class, doing an engineering camp for a week and learning to code a little Raspberry Pi computer. All this stuff is great. All of that is something, right? What I would say is that they can't just like binge Netflix all summer unless they want to be a film director and they're taking notes on editing and angles and shots and all of that, and it is useful for something they're interested in. So, but if you are thinking about trying to find internship opportunities, Jewish Family and Children's Services is a great place to start because they do have a little out of the box internship program, and they're affiliated with a number of different companies, so they can actually help place your child somewhere without them having to do a lot of legwork. But if you've got family friends in an area, if you're interested in something STEM wise, talk to Dr. Burrell. She's got a couple of recommendations with UCSF and a number of other places where we've had students placed during the summer before. So, so yeah, there's a lot of different routes you can go to try and find something to do. Patty, what is your question?
I just wanted to put a plug in for the college fair, excuse me, at UCSF. We have a daughter who graduated last year, and it was so interesting to do that mock admissions part. They separate the kids and the parents, and they give you a bunch of resumes, you know, college applications, and you're supposed to pick within your group like who you think would be admitted, waitlisted, or declined. And it was just really interesting to hear that each school looks for different things. Like, obviously, I'm sure they all want good grades, et cetera, but something I found especially interesting was that they're also making a calculation on how likely your kid is to choose them, because they don't want to pick all the people that are choosing whatever for their safe school and then end up, you know, with no applications and just, you know, different priorities weigh differently in different schools. And I had no idea about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it can be very illuminating to actually be on the receiving end of reading something, trying to evaluate it. And then in the gym afterwards, where the college fair is happening, they usually post results from across all the different classrooms, and you'll find the different rooms admitted different kids, right? And so you really start to see that there's not like a right answer. You know, I think it depends on the institutions, their priorities, and sometimes the human beings having the conversation and making the decision, right? So admission officers love to say, which drives me a little crazy, but you know, college is it's an art and a science admitting, you know, folks. And so being aware of that and the subjective nature, I think, can sometimes soften the blow when you don't get in, because you know, it's not as if you can crack the code and guarantee a result. So oh, I love all this women's college conversation. I'm also a Mount Holyoke alum, so love that Mira's there. And I do think that women's colleges are really important to look at for our female students. They're not right for everybody, but there's certainly a lot of advantages to being in a place where there aren't any preconceived notions about what you can do because you're female. I will also read Doug's message here. We're wondering about sports in college. Any previous JCHS students really into sports who pursued club or D3 in college? The choice of going D1 where sports are exciting versus D3 in club where you can play rather than watch. Great question. We do have a number of JCHS graduates playing D3. We actually have a Mount Holyoke student, a junior, Noah Sharabi, who's swimming Division III, who wasn't a recruited athlete, but just sent some things off to the coach. And he was like, hey, your times seem great. Why don't you come to tryouts? And we've had folks playing squash at Vassar, which is not something that most high school students do, but the tennis skills, the pickleball skills, these can be, you know, translatable to what is mostly an international kind of British sport. We did have I believe he graduated in May, but we did have someone who was playing D3 basketball at Grinnell that was recruited a couple of years ago. So I do think for students who really love the competition and the sport and being on the field, D3 can be a great option. And I think you do have to have some conversations with the coaches and see if you're in the ballpark for them. You would need to be one of the very best athletes at JCHS to even be in the ballpark. Well, I love our school. I think we are not always widely known as a jock powerhouse, but we have had, you know, some strong players in some individual sports. And so if your student is interested in understanding how to make an athletics resume, drafting some emails to coaches, when you are in the D3 realm, you do have to self-advocate and kind of say, hey, I'm out here. And so doing some summer camps, so playing soccer or basketball or hockey this summer at camps where there might be coaches there looking to see your level of skill. That's important, as well as learning a little bit about how to package yourself and then sending that off to some select coaches to start conversations. And usually in terms of the college list, we might end up running kind of two lists, one of places where we think there's some potential and coaches have been biting a little bit and you might be able to play, and then some other schools where it's not so much about playing, it's about the other things that you're excited about. And we see how things roll along. I will say that D3 coaches are going to, if they're interested, really push the student to apply early decision. They are having you on their roster then as someone, and they will put you on a list to admission saying, these are like my top 5 recruits or my top 10 recruits. And often those students receive some preference in the process. They're only going to go all in on that if you're telling them you're going to come, right? And they're trying to manage a roster. If they need a goalie or two, they want to know that if you're admitted, that you're going to fill that spot for them, right? And if you can't commit to early decision, then they may move on to the next person on their list. So be aware that there is, and some coaches can be more aggressive about that than others. So, but if anybody has questions about more athletic recruiting, there was a great session that JT Thomas did with Castellea a few weeks ago. If you missed that, there is a recording of it, so email me. I'm happy to send you out the link. And I also have a little addendum to the handbook that's got a sample athletics resume, a sample email to a coach that you can send the resume with that Coach Moeller and I made. I can send that off as well. So just ping me to request it, and I'm happy to let you know. But, going to Oregon and being a Duck and being in the stands, the big athletics and all of that, I mean, that can also scratch the athletic itch, and you can play club sports in a less, sort of high intensity manner. A lot of D3 schools will say you're a student athlete, so you're a student first, but there's still some travel and some stress around fulfilling your competition obligations. There's a question about, do you still expect College Board to add Bay Area locations for March and May test dates? I sure hope so. And, counselors here have been rattling and complaining with them about how difficult it is to get a seat. So my hope, and based on past year's patterns, is that yes, that will happen. I have no idea when. And again, it's the kind of thing where if seats open up, my listservs will start buzzing with, they've opened up a ballroom at, the SFO Hyatt. And so go get your seat now. So I'll let you know when and if I hear about things, but it doesn't hurt to have yourself on a weekly alarm where you just check the College Board website, either for more seats or next year's dates. So it's maddening, and it's unfortunately the state of the union. 8:52. We have 8 minutes left. Any last burning questions? I don't want to put pressure on it. It could be a casual question. Covered a lot of good ground this morning. I will say there are about 15 of your children, I don't know if they're all folks on this call, who are not yet following any Schools and Score. That is not the end of the world, but it would be something to just check in on. Maybe, nudge them a little bit. If you are logged into Score and can just check to see if they have done nothing with my suggestions, maybe your suggestions, if you put things in, just start asking them to think about that a little bit. And again, there's no real deadline on this coming up, but I do, hope that students are starting to engage, think about, maybe you're going to do some visits during spring break. Maybe you've got a weekend or two where you might be planning to do something this spring. But really, when we hit June and July, that is when I am going to go into Score and start looking at what they're following. Some people might even know there's 2 or 3 schools they know they're going to apply to, so they've put them in the application list. I will start putting those predictions of whether I think the school is a reach, a possible, or a likely for them. I can't do that if they're not following any schools. So it will be important that, again, they're doing some shopping the next few months. And I will continue to do more reminders about this. All right, well, if we have run out of questions for now, thank you for the thank yous. I appreciate it. Always good to see you all. We will meet again on March 28th, but please don't hesitate to be in touch with me between now and then if things come up. And know that my Google Calendar has open times on it. So if you want to have a one-on-one Zoom, if you want to come in person, people have been coming in person. It's like 2019 all over again. Please let me know. Happy to chat. Love to get to know you and your kids more as we continue down the path. So with that, have a good Tuesday.